Hey everybody, Tim Adams here with you again, and today we're going to be talking about establishing healthy boundaries inside a technical ministry. Now, let me paint you a picture just to kind of help define what I mean by that and why it's important. So, let's say it's 5 minutes before your church service begins, and you have a frantic person come up to you. Let's say it's a guest speaker. Um, well, no, let's say it's the worship leader, and they hand you a thumb drive, a USB thumb drive, and they say, "Can you put these slides up on the screen?" And because we're going to open with that song. And let's extend this scenario out, and let's say that this is a perpetual issue. It keeps happening. Um, that is an unhealthy relationship right there. Um, those kinds of things should be planned well in advance. Now, I'll be the first to say, we need to be flexible to adapt to maybe, the Holy Spirit leading in a different direction for that day and that kind of thing. However, if it's a perpetual issue, if it keeps happening over and over and over again, the more times that we as techs acquiesce to that and say, yeah, sure, no problem, the more it's going to happen. And at some point, we need to draw a line in the sand and say, look, this is something that happens continuously. It's not healthy for me. It's not healthy for my team, because essentially we're paying the price for somebody else's laziness, for their unpreparedness, whatever it is, whatever character defect or whatever is causing this issue to continuously come up. We're the ones that are kind of covering for that. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I have no idea where this conversation is going to go. I know it's a very important topic, and I want to make sure that we all understand that it's important and that it is a very real issue that most of us, I would say, deal with maybe a little too often. So with that, I'm going to open it up. I have no real agenda. I think I've stated my case here in the beginning, but Charles, Paul, maybe you guys could start off with your own experiences. Have you experienced something like this? If so, how did you handle it? And maybe what are some pointers on ways that we can lovingly basically say no?
Yeah, I've run into this before, and sometimes the leaders in charge of the ministry will set good boundaries, and it's one thing to remember if you're in that position where your leader has set a good boundary, but you know that this time you can make it work. You might be training the person who's doing this over and over again, that they don't have to listen to the boundaries from the leader. Basically, you're training them, no, that's our policy, but that's more like a guideline. It's not like a rule. So that's one thing that I've seen. I think that a lot of times people behave how you train them to behave. So that's one thing. Now, if it's the fact that it's the leader themselves, I think you need to set some realistic expectations about how long what you do takes. If they're running up 5 minutes before service, you might end up sounding a little bit like Scotty from Star Trek. I can't do it, and then you somehow pull it off, and then they start to believe that any time you say that you can't do it, that you're just pulling Scotty from Star Trek. You're trying to be the hero of the moment by doing the impossible when you might actually believe that you can't do it, and somehow God enables you to. And so I think it's very important to be mindful of the fact that if every time you say you can't do it and then you try and you succeed, either you're wrong about you or everyone's going to believe that anytime you say something, you're not being serious or you're being dramatic or something like that. So I think that that's something to look out for. And I think that you don't want to enable this behavior. It's really hard to say no to people because you want to be a team player. You want to do what's best, but when you're enabling their lack of preparation, you're making them worse for other people. So if you think about, like, in the addiction community, if you have, there's not a blood relation of mine by marriage who was dealing with an addiction to prescription medicine, and his parents kept kind of bailing him out, trying to soften the blow, step in. That is what we call enabling, where you're just making it easy for someone to do it. That's not grace. Grace is helping someone get past their issues and, offering forgiveness. But grace costs. Grace costs Jesus his life. It costs whoever is forgiving what they're forgiving. So you don't want to set up people so that they're always asking for forgiveness, always asking for grace. Every meeting they show up with starts off, "Hey everyone, sorry I'm late." If every single meeting is like that, there's a problem. If every single week your worship leader is handing you a thumb drive 5 minutes before service starts, something is wrong. If it's the odd situation, that's different. But I think it's consistency that you want to avoid. The consistency of letting people step all over you, not because you're self-important, but because you're training them that they don't have to take responsibility for what is in their court.
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, to sum it up, we teach other people how to treat us by what we allow and what we don't. It's essentially what you're saying, right, Paul?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sorry to surprise you and throw it back at you. So, yeah, I totally agree. Life happens, and I have no problem with every once in a while the worship leader, the pastor coming up and throwing us a curveball. I have got no problem with that because as a certain ministry that I'm loosely associated with calls it, it's trying to follow the wild goose. Apparently, where they get that from is back in, I think it's Irish lore or back in Irish history, or maybe it was Scottish. Anyway, in one of the languages, I think it was probably Gaelic, it was translated, the word for the Holy Spirit was the wild goose. Anyway, because it can be like a wild goose chase trying to follow the different promptings, if you will. So I want to make sure that there's allowance for that. But when it's a perpetual problem, then I would much rather see something along the lines of, how do we approach that? Okay, say, maybe you could just say, look, I really want to help you out, but I've noticed that this is a real problem, and let's talk about it after the service. Or pull them aside after the service and address it then. The one thing you don't want to do is address it in front of other people, and basically tear them down, and that's not going to help anybody. Charles, what do you think?
Well, I guess I'm still stuck on the whole Scotty analogy that Paul came up with. That was just like awesome with the Scotty thing. I never really thought of that, but it is so appropriate, in church tech. People coming to you at the last minute, no, I can't do it, and then you end up pulling it off. And a lot of times it's because you don't trust that you can pull it off, but you quote unquote get lucky in the sense that God helps you out with it. But the challenge being from a technical background, as most people that are back there in the sound booth, the video booth, we all struggle with patience and control. And the biggest challenge with control is trying to control the uncontrollable, which is other people. But there are some tips to try to make things work for you. Like Paul was saying, training people on how they treat you is one thing. But another thing is training people into what your expectations are. So, if people continue to come to you and you pull a Scotty on them and you pull it off, then they're, like he said, they're going to continue to, wear you down. But on the other hand, it's kind of like what we talked in a previous hangout about recruiting volunteers. You can't just sit back there in the sound booth or the video booth and say, oh, I wish people would quit coming to me at the last minute. I wish they would do better. I wish they would do that. Well, sometimes you have to go out and do things. Just like how you have to recruit for volunteers, you have to set your expectations. And one of the ways you can do that is, at the beginning of the church, when most people are having like a Bible study, some call it a Sunday school, some call it a Sabbath school, whatever the case may be, that can be a good opportunity to go around for the leaders of the day and just ask them, hey, have you got anything for me today? You have to get out there in front of them because they may just be forgetting to get it to you. And there are those people that are chronic people that forget they have to get it to you, and they continue to come to you 5 minutes before the service starts. When they had it all along, they just forget to come to you. So if you go out during the church service when it's a less busy time and ask them if they've got something, that helps you get better prepared. So that's one thing. Of course, I'm coming from a small church perspective. So when I say controlling the uncontrollable, in a small church, this situation, you can usually get your hands around it pretty quick with your regular leaders because there's a small core group of leaders that are always there. But the curveball that always gets thrown our way is, like we said earlier, the guest speakers or the guest presenters or somebody that's not part of your normal congregation, or even maybe just somebody that decides they're going to step up and start, leading out in a ministry in church that hasn't done it before. Another thing to kind of institute in that case, where you have a lot of guest speakers, is get your greeter crew involved. If you've got a greeter program set up with people greeting, when people greet and introduce themselves and they go, oh, you're the guest speaker for today, bam, that's where they should kind of do an introduction to say, well, let me introduce you to our head of, the technical services for today. If you've got anything you need from them, now's the time to kind of get it addressed, and that helps out with that. Of course, I'm sitting here thinking of good ideas and monkey wrenches at the same time. Of course, there are the monkey wrenches where the leaders don't show up till right before the church service starts anyway, but when that happens, you just got to roll with the punches. But long story short, one of the biggest things that I've seen that's been helpful from my standpoint is get out of the booth more or less. Get out there, find what people need earlier in the church service so that you don't get dumped on at the last minute.
Okay.
I
Go
think
ahead,
that was
Paul.
a great point. I think that's something that hadn't occurred to me, but it's so relevant, is the person who actually is prepared but has forgotten to pass that on to you so that you can do it. So it's not that they're in the back office at the last minute, like scrawling out notes on a piece of paper. And I struggle with procrastination as much, if not more, than anyone else. So I'm talking to myself here. I once had a paper in seminary that was literally a semester late. Like, it was due at the end of one semester. I turned it in at the end of the next semester. I no longer had that class, and I turned in the paper. That was how late it was. But I think that that's two totally different issues. And you can set up systems to deal with either. And one thing that I realized one day, my pastor was so very late getting his sermon notes to us that, like, we're putting them in during the beginning of the sermon. So, I mean, like, he called for something, I was in the process of copying and pasting that note in. I mean, so you can't change people, but you can change yourself. So the question is, and I told my daughter this recently because she had a grade issue. Given the exact same circumstances, how could you have done your part better? So what I started thinking of was, well, it's crazy that we're waiting this whole time for sermon notes when the pastor has an assistant that's up there that could be trained to at least put a draft in ProPresenter, you know. So it hasn't been spell checked. Fine, I can do that if it's already in there. And so I guess the point in that case is sometimes you can't make it better, but you can figure out better systems. You know, if it takes you 2 hours to put in all your slide notes and everything, figure out a better system, because if someone shows up 90 minutes before, that's going to be just the same kind of emergency as if they show up 5 minutes before. But if you can get everything in 5 minutes and they show up an hour and a half before, that's no emergency at all, because that's, you know, 3 more minutes of your time and you can make it happen, assuming you're there already. So I think each of these circumstances is different, and I don't like, I guess it's part of my personality as an artist, I don't like hard and fast rules that, oh, everything has to be done by Thursday. Well, it's Thursday at 5:03 p.m. and you were supposed to leave at 5, so now it won't be ready for Sunday. Even though you're going to be there Friday and you didn't have anything else to do, but because of the policy you won't. I don't like that. I think that that's erring too far on that side. But I also don't like, but you said turn it in by Thursday, so it's Sunday morning. That's close enough. No, that's not close enough. You know, it really, I think setting expectations that what we do is more like composing a song than it is playing something that exists already. When I first started doing video at my church, I said, please, I want to help in every way possible, but I cannot create a video on a Sunday morning. I can create one on a Saturday. It won't be nearly as good as if I created the Saturday before. It won't be nearly as good as if I created 2 weeks before. So I think that it's good to set the expectations as well, that when you're doing something techy, a lot of times it's more like creating something from scratch than it is just doing something that you've done a million times, because every presentation is totally different, every sound mix is totally different, every video is totally different. Lighting cues are often totally different depending on how much production you put into those. So it's not the case that you show up and you press 2 buttons and it's automated and it's the same 2 buttons in the same order. It's totally different. So it's worth setting that expectation.
I agree. Charles, do you have anything to add to that? I mean, I've got some thoughts, but
No, not really. I mean, Paul kind of put my spiel a little bit in a more friendly term. You know, I kind of summed it up as get out of the booth. But you know, it's back to that thing. How can you improve how you react to situations?
right. And I think while that is a great question, you know, because we always want to be improving ourselves. And you know, I think of that text, you know, remove the plank from your own eye before you worry about the speck in your brother's. But I do think that there is some space here for maybe some discipleship, certainly relationship. You know, instead of going to the person or not even going to the person and just kind of silently steaming to yourself and you're like, no, I hate it when they do this, and blah, 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 and just being negative about it, you know, using what you guys are saying, how can I influence this process? How can I begin a dialogue that could have the desired outcome where everybody wins? And a lot of times I think the simplest thing to do is to just start a relationship with that person, start a dialogue, say, hey, how are you doing? Don't even approach it from the angle of you're inconveniencing me, you're making me work harder and cover for you. Instead of starting from that angle, which is negative, start from the angle of, hey, how are you doing? Because we don't know what's going on in their personal life. They may be facing foreclosure on their house. They may be facing down divorce. They may be, going through a really intense period in their life. And what they need are people to, kind of come around them and pray for them and support them and just care about them. We don't know the battles that other people are fighting. And I think if we can approach it from that angle, instead of you're ruining church, I think that that's going to be really, really beneficial. What do you guys think?
I think you're right, Tim. I think that's even a step. Even I think there are 3 ways you can do this. You can sit silently in the tech booth and steam, or complain about them to someone who is not them. I don't think that's the right choice at all. I think that Jesus is very clear that if someone offends you, you should talk to them, because as it turns out, they have more control over their behavior than whoever you're blowing off steam to does.
Right.
So I think, and that's the hardest thing in the world. Don't hear me say, oh yeah, I look forward to talking to someone and saying, that I almost wasn't able to start service because that came in so late. Or, did you notice that I left out 2 verses in that song? Yeah, that was the song I was working on when you came in. Or, things like that. I think that's part of the right choice, but I think you're right also, Tim, going from the standpoint of expecting the best, assuming the best of them, and saying, is something wrong? You're normally spot on when it comes to this stuff, and I've noticed lately you're less reliable. Maybe attacking it from that perspective is worth doing.
Charles, what do you think?
Yeah, well, like I was saying earlier with my example of the people that come up to you last minute, in my experience, the ones that have been chronic offenders, if you will, have, like I said, been the ones that they had it prepared all along, but they just keep constantly forgetting to get it to you. And at first, when people were doing that to me, I'd flat tell them, I was the Nazi, if you will. I would tell them, nope, not going to show it, not going to do it. And, after I calmed down a bit, I started kind of telling them, I'm saying, hey, some of this stuff has some prep time. Like a lot of times this was back in the days when we still had a, 4x3 projector versus a widescreen. People would bring me a widescreen PowerPoint presentation, and I'd have to spend some time to correct it and, correct some of the font sizes and rearrange that. Or even, getting PowerPoint slideshows from people that really don't know how to make PowerPoint, and they had bad color choices for text versus background, and I had to modify that. I just, after telling them no for so long, I started telling them, sometimes when I get material, it requires a little bit of modification to work with our system. And, I just need to get this from you as early as possible to give me more time to make it work with our system. And like I said, that's when I started developing the approach of coming out of the booth, so to speak, because the minute I'd see somebody coming to church, then I know is that chronic offender to getting stuff to me at the last minute. As soon as I see them walk in the door, bam, I'm right up on them saying, hey, have you got something for me today? And usually they're like, oh yeah, sure, I got it, da 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 da, and we're good. So like I say, there's ways of dealing with that after you calm down. Because believe me, like I said, for the longest period of time, I'd say probably a good 6 months straight to a year, I was just flat telling people no, and just people started getting mad at me. It was like, you never are flexible, you never show what I bring, da 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 da. So that's how I had to change myself to make it work. But that's also how I've kind of trained other people, if you will, to get them to be better. Is some of those people that were chronic offenders that would get stuff to me at the last minute, now they're not a problem anymore. They come see me before I come see them because they know I'm going to come see them anyway. So anyway.
Oh, I did unmute myself. Okay, so let's talk about this specific situation. I think we've covered the chronic offenders pretty well, and maybe how to deal with that. Let's talk about people who are forgetful, because I think that between the three of us, we can probably come up with a way where we're not having to do all of that work. Maybe we can implement or give them access to some kind of online thing like Google Drive or Dropbox, and we're still sending them reminders, but how do we make it easier for them in their forgetfulness, or just their general busyness? I mean, let's be honest, everybody is busy these days. So how can we as techs provide a solution that makes it as easy as possible for people to even in their business, even in their forgetfulness, to get us the content that we need when we need it?
I think there's a couple of things that you can do. First off, you can have people on your team that aren't necessarily technical. So just because I think we all think that everyone that has to be volunteers that help us out have to run sound or run lights. It could be that there's someone who has the gift of helps or administration that they think, well, I can't really do anything, I'm just administrative. But if you could task them to, here is your job. On Sunday morning, you get there early. They're probably an early person anyway. You get there early, and your job is to wait for Sister Mildred to come because she will have something for me. And that's your job. And then that person would probably be delighted to use their abilities of administration. Another thing that I've noticed, and Charles touched on this, is people that I call it too helpful, and I'm gonna clarify what that means, and that is, I don't want anyone making a PowerPoint for my church. I don't. I want the information that goes in the presentation. So that way I don't have to change the aspect ratio. I don't have to change the font. I don't have to change the colors and the design and all that. I want a text file. And if they're spending time creating slides in PowerPoint, they're wasting their time because I'm just going to undo it. And sometimes that might be a way to make it easier on them and easier on you at the same time. So you say, yeah, could you just get me a Microsoft Word file with this information, and all the images that you're using, just don't bother putting them into the Microsoft Word file. Don't do that. That's too much work for you. I'm just going to mess with it and do stuff anyway. Just give me the originals, and then, like Tim suggested, you could have either they do that with the thumb drive and you have your administrator waiting for them while you're preparing other stuff, or they have access to Google Drive or Dropbox or what have you, and they can do that ahead of time. I think there are plenty of ways to make this both easier for them and easier for you, because if you're reformatting everything, as just an example, That's wasted labor that they don't need to do. And it might be their heart that they're trying to be helpful to you, but in fact, they're doing just the opposite.
Okay. So maybe what we have here is one of these differences in culture between churches, because, Paul, you go to what we would arguably call a fairly large mid-sized church. Would that be fair?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's true.
I go to a church that is maybe 150 people. So I'm on the very small side of, or maybe on the high side of small church. And Charles, you go to a church where you're getting how many?
Around 40.
40. Okay, so very small. I think we'd consider that, and I think you'd be okay with that. So what we're seeing is a cultural difference here. So like in my church, all of the content that goes on the screen is already prepared for us by the pastoral staff, and there's really one pastor or one staff member that's in the leadership team that is responsible for that, and she really owns it. She steps up to it, and that's all that. It's not all that she does. It's one of the ridiculous amounts of things that she does every week, but she does it really well. And if there are changes that need to be made, she's the one that makes them, or she will ask us to make them if she doesn't have time. And that's great. We don't have to worry about that. Very, very rarely we'll get the dreaded thumb drive, or worse, we'll get handed an iPhone to play some track off of because somebody's singing that wasn't necessarily planned for. But that doesn't happen very often. So, I don't know, Charles, you said that you're not necessarily able to talk very much about this, but what would you say in response to Paul's comments?
Well, I guess in the sense of people being too helpful, that was, the phrasing of this original question. In a very small church, you don't really find people that are too helpful. You're struggling to find people that want to help to begin with. And a lot of times the ones that help, they don't realize that technology would enhance, what they're doing. And the few that do, they'll put some together and it's kind of cobbled together and you have to clean it up. Like the perfect example of the thing that probably happens to me the most often is somebody coming up to me with the intermission between our Bible study and our worship service with a physical picture, and they say, I want to show this picture during children's story, but I'd like the audience to be able to see it, not just the kids sitting in the front row with me. So I have to run at the last minute to a scanner that we fortunately have at our church and scan that picture in. So, those are the sort of things that I have to deal with. I have to catch those people earlier in the service during the Bible study times so that I can get their physical picture and scan it in. So that's why I say it's kind of hard for me to answer on people being too helpful, because I'm the tech guy. There's really I can count maybe 2 other people in our church that are technically capable, and that's it. So most of the people that are leaders that bring stuff, they're not bringing me PowerPoint slideshows or sermon notes or stuff like that. They're not. So anyway.
Well, that's again a difference between the churches that are represented in this hangout, which I think is great. We get all these different perspectives. But yeah. Let's just go ahead, Paul. Go ahead.
I was thinking of like the business person that delivers a PowerPoint on profit and loss during the week and thinks, oh, I'm being helpful by creating a PowerPoint, which is something that is just abysmal when you get it. That kind of thing. I recognize it's also, and we've fought this fight too, of someone that says, oh, I have this physical picture that needs to go up on the screen and it needs to be scanned in, and just it took a long time to get. I guess for our church, what we ended up with was, it's better that we know everything that you think might possibly be in the message, in the sermon, in the announcements, anything like that, because I can always take stuff out. But if you come 5 minutes before service and want to add something in, that's a bigger deal. Whereas if a week ahead of time you handed me a picture and said, next week I'd love to show this on screen, and then Sunday morning you go, it didn't work out, I don't need to show that, I could skip that. That's simple. So I think defining those expectations and trying to get more earlier rather than, oh, it's just one more thing at the last minute. One more thing at the last minute is much harder than one less thing at the last minute.
Agreed. Absolutely. It's better to have more stuff than what you actually have time for, as far as, prepared and ready to go, than to have too little and you're frantically trying to, fill out the content before the program or even as the program begins. I actually have a great example of this. 2001, I got the opportunity to go with a ministry over to Central Africa for a satellite broadcast evangelistic series, and I was just taken along as technical support. And the unfortunate thing for a colleague of mine doing all of the sermon illustrations is he came up with this great idea a few years prior to culturalize the illustrations. And so basically he'd go around town taking pictures of the local people, and then he'd insert them into these kind of classic painted scenes or illustrations. And it was a great idea. The problem was the particular speaker was using 150 illustrations per night, and all of those had to be culturalized. So this guy was, we'd be on the way to the soccer stadium and he'd be rendering these things out so that he could play them for broadcast. And there were several times where I had to play the intro to the program for the satellite audience off of my laptop, and then play other content up until the message started, the sermon started. We'd swap laptops out, and I think the closest we ever got was 30 seconds before the speaker called for the first graphic was when the render finished. And it was an incredible workload on my colleague. And fortunately we had equipment that was able to handle it, but that would be a circumstance where maybe there was a conversation that could take place to say, we're in the middle of Africa, I've only got so many hours during the day and there's only so much that this equipment can do. Can we possibly cut down on the amount of illustrations? Can we take it from 150 to 125? Because even that would make a difference. And that really taught me that while we want to support the people up front, we want to support the church, we want to support the ministry of the church, but we don't want to sacrifice our sanity, our health, our emotional stability, whatever you want to call it, in order to make that happen, because I cannot believe in any argument that suggests that is biblical or healthy or what God wants. I remember locally a few years ago there was a church that was going through massive explosive growth, and they had a very active video department, and I was looking for some video work, and so I said, hey, I'll go over there. Well, essentially, long story short, they wanted me to work 70-plus hour weeks with no pay and trust that God would provide the financial resources I needed in order to pay my bills. Obviously, I didn't take that job. I'm happy for people whose faith journey is there, but I just wasn't there because God also gave me a brain. So that's the kind of thing that really I don't like to see because it's not healthy. And I think the way that it should be is that everybody wins. The way that it's supposed to work is everybody wins. Everybody is in relationship together. Everybody's in community. Everybody's helping each other. And I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think that for some reason, the North American culture has this double standard for artists where we'll say art is important, art is something we want. How dare they cut the art program at our school? That's what we say. But then when it comes to actually paying an artist, there are horror stories all over the internet about, and I can tell you one of my own, about people not wanting to pay an artist even minimum wage for their time. I found a job on Craigslist to edit some videos, and the way he described it sounded like a 1-hour job. So I was willing to do that for $25. Why not? 1 hour, I can do that. By the time I got done with all of his requests, it was less than minimum wage to do what he wanted. It was a 30-second video, but every time I'd get done with it, he'd have 5 more changes. And I finally just had to say, look, that's enough. Now that's one thing when it's a chiropractor that's announcing this special supplement, which is what it was in my case. It's something totally different when it's the church. And when the Apostle Paul said, by quoting Jesus, the worker is worth his wages, you would think that the churches would do this. I volunteer at my church. I like volunteerism, but I think that for some churches, volunteerism is a drug, and this is going to be very controversial, but it's a drug that they sustain themselves on and are addicted to, and would rather ask a volunteer to sacrifice relationships, family, work, everything to do that, than to say, look, if this is important, God's going to give us the resources to pay you, because right now you're, like they were asking you, Tim, right now you're in a situation where you're volunteering 70 hours a week. That's not biblical. Maybe you volunteer 70 hours in 1 week a year, but volunteering 70 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, that's just crazy.
The pastor, was probably supposed to cast the vision of the expectations for the overall group and things, but reality is most of the time probably the pastor's one of the offenders. I wouldn't say so much with our current pastor, because he doesn't make, notes or anything for anybody to go by. But yeah, the pastor should set that expectation, at least maybe at a leadership level, for the people that are leading regularly in the service. He should help set those expectations. But as far as bringing him in to help, discipline a situation, that should be the last resort, not the first resort.
Okay, Paul?
I agree. I'm going to name drop real quick. I was talking to Todd Elliott, who's the former technical arts director at Willow Creek, and I asked him this question, basically. Well, what do you do when someone comes to you and what they're asking for is impossible? And he had I thought it was a great piece of advice, which was, well, define reality for them. They may not know what they're asking. A lot of times they'll say, oh yeah, can we do thus and so? And what they're thinking is that takes like 5 minutes and costs like $1, right? When in fact you're thinking, okay, that's a 3-month project that'll cost about $30,000 if we use all volunteer labor. If we don't, it'll cost a lot more. And they may not know that. And so defining reality is one thing that might be helpful. Another thing that might be helpful is to provide options. Just say, look, I'd love to do that. I think once you know that this takes 3 months and $30,000, you're not going to want to do this. But I do have an idea that might be closer to what you had in mind. And once you give them that idea that's closer to what they had in mind, a lot of times they'll go, oh yeah, totally do that one. That's the one I want right there. The $1 5-minute one is what I wanted. I know it sounded like I wanted the expensive, crazy one. I've decided I don't want that, and a lot of times that'll help. But if your pastor is one of the offenders, I think that's what you do is you say, okay, Pastor, I want to do what you've asked. Here's why it's going to be really difficult. Do you want me to try and kill myself to do it? Or do you want this other option that's something that might be more like what you had in mind? Assuming they don't want you to do something crazy or, stay up 4 days all night straight and not be able to function and get in a car wreck, assuming they don't want that, which they probably don't. If they do, you've got other issues, then, proceed from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Charles, you wanted to go back to the worker is worth his wage part of this discussion.
Yeah, that's kind of, sorry if I was a little distracted there earlier when you kind of started a new subject there, because my mind was already going on the worker is worth his wages after what Paul said, but I think I can segue this all together because Paul's kind of going where I'm going here. I heard a very interesting offering appeal at one point in time. I know it's kind of a little off subject, but it was an offering appeal that always talked about somebody. Somebody financially provided for this ministry. Somebody did this. Somebody did that. And then all of a sudden, somebody wasn't there anymore. So people wondered why things weren't happening, and it's because that somebody didn't provide. Well, sometimes the technical program of the church is viewed as somebody. Oh, that somebody puts the words up on the screen. Oh, that somebody, gets my sermon notes in at the last minute. And I guess it all boils back down to expectations, setting expectations. And back to your deal about the pastor and leadership is setting that expectation that somebody that does technical work, it's not the 5-minute job that they think it is. Sometimes it can be an hour worth of prep to display something that only shows for 5 minutes. So that's something to just keep in mind as we're thinking of the worker is worth his wages, and setting the expectation, casting that vision is throw out there that somebody takes a lot more effort than what it thinks. And I mean, this sounds a little retaliatory in nature, and I don't mean to come across that way, but maybe sometimes when the main offender is the pastor and that vision that the pastor's casting just snowballs on you, maybe sometimes giving that somebody analogy to the pastor and putting it in terms that he would understand about, oh, well, that somebody does visitation, that somebody does the sermon every week. Maybe that might, start make things click with people, and they might come around to go, oh, I do need to get with somebody a little earlier.
That's not a bad idea. Paul, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, so many things are automated in our world today that we might think, oh yeah, it's just an automated process, but as it turns out, tasks get bigger because now we have more capabilities. So I think that's it's a really great thing to attach what it actually takes to what someone is asking and let them know, no, it's not the case that I put the thumb drive in the computer and the computer handles the rest. I actually have to get in there and adjust things individually to make it work. And it's not that I'm snooty and have to do this, it's that even with my glasses, I couldn't read it, and I just got a brand new pair, you know. So I think those things are worth doing. It's worth, I guess I just keep coming back to assuming the best of people, that it's not the case that they want to screw over your life. It's not the case that they're trying to be mean to you most of the time. So if that's not the case, it might just be ignorance, and I mean that in the best sense of the word. They just don't know. And if you just don't know something, it's not that you're evil, it's just, you know, I don't know how to perform heart surgery. That's not that I'm evil, and it's not that I'm not intelligent. I just never bothered to study medicine or heart surgery or anything like that. Same thing for people that come to you last minute with something. Is it could be that they just don't know, and you can help them know and improve the future.
Absolutely. Love it. One of the things that popped in my head was, you know, kind of dovetailing off of what Charles was saying, you know, use an analogy that they're going to understand. You know, so let's say that this person is a framer, okay, on a construction site. That's what they do for work. You know, so maybe you can toss the ball into their court, or you know, paint a picture for them in a way that they're going to understand. You know, if if the general contractor comes up to you as a framer after, you know, you've already framed a particular door in for a very specific size and says, so that door is going to be these dimensions, right? And we'll just need you to take care of that, and you need to be done in 20 minutes. You know, or we're ready for that. We're going to be ready for that in 5 minutes. You can. So, you know, good luck, and we'll see you in 5 minutes. You know, I'm not a framer. You know, I don't know if that's actually doable. I've seen framing done, and to me, that's a ridiculous request. But that's the kind of, you know, kind of take the situation and put it in a context that they're going to be familiar with, that's going to help them understand the reality of how much work what they're asking for is actually going to take. That's just one thing that that popped into my head. Charles, you say that you have another weird idea. Your words, not mine.
Well, actually, I have something even crazier to say after that analogy you gave. I thought you should have gave that analogy in the tone of voice of the boss from the movie Office Space. Yeah, we're going to need you to come in on Saturday, you know, that sort of thing. Because, I mean, seriously, that's kind of how the requests come at you at the last minute, is that same sort of deal. And using that example of framing up a door is a great analogy to throw back at somebody that they might get. But onto my weird idea. The weird idea that I've toyed around with, but I've never been brave enough to pull it off, is, you know, sometimes people, they neglect that somebody, right? We're talking about technology here, but that could be anything. That could be, you know, the music ministry. It could be the children's ministry. People come to, like Paul says, get addicted to volunteerism and just expect that it's going to happen, you know, that sort of thing. I've always kind of toyed around with the idea of, at a church service, periodically having a fast from a particular ministry, if you will. So, like, say, 1 week, you have no technology at church. Or 1 week, you have no music accompaniment. You have to go a cappella. You know, have some of those periods in there, not in a mean or a retaliatory way, but just have it in a sense of going, wow, now we know what we're missing because we don't have that this week. Now, granted, in the church of my size, 40 people, I'm the technical guy, my wife's the pianist. If we go away for a weekend, which is fortunately not as often as I would like to get away more often. But when we do get away to visit family and stuff, the next week we get back to church. Oh man, we missed y'all. Da 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 da. It's not that it's kind of nice to hear that when you come back, not in a self-important, I gotta boost my ego sort of way, but you realize that people actually realize what they're missing when you're gone. So, like I say, something I've always toyed around with is doing something like that where you don't leave for that week. You just don't do the job. You take a break and put some sort of positive spin on it so it doesn't sound retaliatory, that you're just taking a break, and then the church realizes, hey, these services that people provide on a volunteer basis matter. And like I said, not just technology, it could be anything.
Sorry, there we go. Call it an acoustic weekend, an acoustic service. I don't know, just an idea. Paul?
Yeah, this might be something that you could actually pull off if you've got some video skill in your church. You could probably actually do it live just by rearranging things, and that is quite literally rearranging who does what. So I had this idea probably 10 years ago for a video, like if we were going to do something on volunteerism, we could just have either have a video where the pastor does it all, and so like you just pretend like it's a weekend service and the pastor's parking cars and then the pastor's greeting people and then the pastor takes the baby into the nursery and and is horrible at all of it, right? But then when it comes to the message, there's no one for the message. I think that would be kind of an interesting video idea, or the wrong people do it. So we actually did one recently where there was a girl that she's a dancer, and I don't know how your denominations feel about dancing. Mine is okay with it, so I'm going to tell the story. So she's a dancer, and so they did this entire thing where she's trying to move like a dancer in whatever she does. So she's like trying to serve coffee, and she's spilling coffee on people because she's twirling and coffee, they don't go together. Then she tries to take care of a kid, and she nearly drops it. That doesn't go together. But then we do a song that requires a dance, and she's made for it. So that would be kind of one way to show it. You could even do like have the technical people pretending to sing and play instruments, and it's like cat scratching, and then you have the musicians like trying to take care of the children, and the kids are like beating them up with little rubber hammers and stuff. And you could really have fun with something like that and say, look, if the right people weren't in the right spots, or if we didn't have people in this spot and someone was just forced to try and fill in and they're just really bad at it, that might be a way to do something like what you were suggesting, Charles, without it being you actually don't have any electricity this weekend. Remember that next time you're thinking about skipping your tithe check, that kind of thing.
That's awesome.
Yeah. In fact, that kind of brings me to mind a video I once saw. It was about turning your cell phones off in church. It's kind of made its way out there on the interwebs and the virality of it, but it was this deal about silencing your phones before church, and it like showed people spontaneously combusting, kind of like they were going to hell or something because they didn't silence their cell phone. I mean, totally off the wall, not scripturally accurate, but it was quite humorous and got the point across of silencing your cell phone before church.
So maybe what we could do is just sum this up as like a tech appreciation weekend or service, where maybe the entire service is not acoustic, but a very specific section of it is, so that I remember I was doing lighting for an event, and they were kind of giving props out to the audio video lighting people, and and they didn't prep us for this. At least I knew nothing about this coming up, and fortunately, I was able to respond. But they were kind of up front, in front of, I don't know, 5,000 people, let's say, and they just hit us with, we really want to appreciate our audio video people. Can you imagine what this would be like with no sound? And he mutes the microphone, and the guy keeps talking, and he's like, and we're just like, oh, okay, wow, it was really effective. Can you imagine what this would be like with no video? Screens go black. Or lighting. And I'm just like, I knew it was coming, and I'm frantic, like, what do I do? Oh, yeah, I have a master dimmer. So I turned it down, and, everything goes dark. And just doing something that simple can be extremely effective in helping people understand what it is that not only we provide, but also the difference that a technical ministry makes. And like I said, it doesn't have to be an entire service. You can certainly do that if you wish. I'm not going to, say, no, that's a bad idea, but I would encourage you, and guys, feel free to jump in on this, but I would encourage you that if you're going to do an entire service, understand the full repercussions of doing that. So if you're doing live streaming every week and you do a totally acoustic service, that has very real repercussions for your live stream audience. All of a sudden, if you decide to live stream that, they're not going to understand necessarily what's going on, and there's really not going to be any value because there's no amplified sound, which means there's no live mix, which means there's really no audio going out to the live stream. You're not doing any lighting? Okay. Or you're doing low light? Okay. Your live stream audience isn't going to be able to see anything. If you do IMAG on your screens, again, not really going to be able to do anything. So just think through that very thoroughly before you jump on the bandwagon of doing that. But just having an appreciation of tech from up front, I think, will really kind of, well, no, it'll really drive the point home. I got a big thumbs up from Paul on that idea, so that's good. And we need to wrap this up. So I did want to just kind of, my closing thought, as techs, we really need to respect ourselves, and we need to know our own self, our own worth, and not just what we bring to the table, what we bring to the church, but what we bring to life. What is it that we bring to others, and how do we enrich other people's lives? And not from a prideful or egotistical standpoint, but who is it that God created you to be, and what effect can you have on others' lives that is positive? And I think if we start there, going way back to the very beginning of this hangout, and how is it that we can do our jobs better? How can we respond in a situation rather than react? How can we interface with other people in a way that we're not becoming doormats, but we're also not criticizing, we're not tearing other people down, and we're helping them grow, we're informing, and we're educating. What do you guys have any final thoughts?
I think that's great. I think that we want to, maybe that's part of how we communicate all this, is just saying to people, look, it's not that I'm a prima donna. It's not that I don't want to do what you're asking. It's coming back to my earlier point, it's that what you're asking is probably more than you think it is. And how can I help you ask for less so that it can happen? How can I help you ask for an appropriate amount so that you have the appropriate expectations for what I'm capable of doing given the amount of time I have to do it? Things like that, as techs, we can't say, well, I'm going to hold the whole church service hostage because you're not doing it my way. That's not our heart at all. Our heart is to say, I want to do a great job, not because it has to be great so that I feel great, but I want to do a great job because God is worth it. He's worth offering my best to. I can't be perfect because he didn't make me to be perfect, and if he wanted perfect, he'd do it himself, but I can do the best I can do, and if you come in with a 2-hour job 5 minutes before church starts, I can't do a good job on that. In fact, I might not even be able to get it to the bare minimum to where it's even usable. And I think we both want at least the bare minimum of usability, if not even better, to halfway decent. So just assuming that of the other person and trying to set those expectations and communicate so that you both treat each other as people, not as you're the stumbling block in front of me getting my message on the screen, or you're the stumbling block in front of me doing this other thing that the pastor has already asked me to do, or what have you. I think if we can work together, that's ultimately what we want. And we just need to communicate that so that everyone knows that's our heart in it.
Charles?
Just ditto to both of those things. Like I say, the biggest thing that we struggle with as tech people a lot of times is getting people to walk a mile in our shoes. But like I say, we also got to remember to walk that mile in their shoes, and like I said earlier, get out of the booth a little bit more.
Agreed. So just to summarize what Paul was saying, and I think all of us are kind of in agreement here, we want to do the best that we can do, but we want to do it within realistic and healthy boundaries. Doing something subpar just to get something done to meet a request is not really what we want to do, because that's a lose-lose. We want to do something with excellence, and to do something with excellence requires communication, realistic expectations, and planning. And, frankly, that's the reality. And then finally, we want to trust other people's hearts towards us and towards the church. And everybody, I would say we want to start from the position of assuming that people want the best for the church service, and for the people that are going to, ultimately be blessed, hopefully, by that church service. And I think if we can start from that perspective, that's going to be a really huge kind of stepping block or stepping stone towards, crossing over these barriers and these obstacles and these issues to meet people where they're at, and kind of maybe bring them into a situation that's healthy. I did want to mention really quickly, I'll put the link down in the description for this video, but Church Production Magazine just had their latest issue came out, and as is their custom, they have kind of an editorial, if you will, at the very last page. And it was quite interesting. I was just reading it today, and they were talking about, or this particular author was talking about how it's not about how cool we can make the church service. It's not about how we can serve with excellence and all that, but it's about people. And if we're sacrificing the good of the people, you know, in lieu of performing with excellence or doing our job, to the point where we get siloed, or we get so focused on doing a perfect mix, or you know, EQing somebody just perfect. You know, we get kind of lost in the forest, you know. And if we're sacrificing really what we're there to do, and that is to reach people for God and bring them to Christ, then that doesn't help either. So, like I said, I'll put the link down in the description so you guys can read that at your own leisure. But I thought it was an interesting article, you know, the timing of it and all that in lieu of, or you know, in relation to this discussion. So, thank you for watching. Once again, for the summer months, we are doing once a month Hangouts, and we'll start doing weekly again probably in September. We might push that to October, but yeah, if you have ideas, suggestions for topics that you want to hear talked about, we're always welcome to hear about those. You can find us in the Church Tech community on Google+, Adventist Church Tech, Church Mag, and Tech Applied. So one of those four, you'll find one of us. So again, thank you for watching, and until next time, be blessed.